April 1963, Birmingham City Jail, solitary confinement cell. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. sits alone on a metal bench, 3 days into isolation. A white guard enters carrying a dinner tray, beans, cornbread, water. King lifts his fork, pauses mid-reach. Something glistens on the surface of the beans. Spit, deliberate, visible, unmistakable. The guard stands in the doorway, arms crossed, smirking. King sets the fork down carefully, says nothing. The guard leans against the frame. Problem, boy? King folds a white handkerchief on his lap, his father's, carried through every arrest. He looks up calmly and speaks 8 words. The guard's face changes instantly. Shock, then something like shame. 20 minutes later, the same guard returns with a fresh tray, won't make eye contact. What could Martin Luther King Jr. possibly say to make a man who just humiliated him bring back a clean meal? Birmingham, April 12, 1963. Good Friday. King led 50 marchers through downtown, deliberately defying a court injunction against protests. Police Commissioner Bull Connor's officers arrested him within blocks. This was King's 5th major arrest, but Birmingham wasn't Albany or Montgomery. Birmingham was the most segregated city in America, where dynamite explosions earned neighborhoods the nickname Bombingham. King knew what he was walking into. They took him to Birmingham City Jail and placed him in solitary confinement. No phone calls, no visitors, complete isolation. The cell measured 8 by 10 feet. Metal bench, sink, toilet, barred window too high to see through. King's public image was the Baptist minister in pressed suits, speaking of dreams and justice. His jail reality was concrete floors, steel doors, and guards who saw him as a troublemaker threatening their entire way of life. The guards had a pattern. Meal trays arrived late or got lost. Food came cold. Items accidentally fell on the floor. Small humiliations, daily reminders of powerlessness. King noticed the white handkerchief in his jacket pocket. His father gave it to him in 1954, just before the Montgomery bus boycott began. His father's instruction, "Son, dignity is what you carry with you, not what they give you." King made it a habit, folding the handkerchief on the table during meals, a small ritual of self-respect. The guard was local, early 30s, raised in Birmingham when segregation was simply the way things were. He'd worked at the jail since 1960, night shift mostly, decent pay for the work. He watched the Freedom Riders get arrested in 1961, bloody, violent confrontations at the bus stations. He'd seen protesters dragged through booking, singing hymns while being fingerprinted. To him, King represented outside agitation, people from up north who didn't understand Birmingham. The other guards talked constantly. King was getting special treatment. Supporters outside, NAACP lawyers visiting, newspapers covering everything. Some guards resented it. They saw King's nonviolent resistance as performance, manipulation, making them look like villains. The guard decided King needed a reminder of exactly where he was and who held power. April 15th, evening shift. He volunteered to deliver dinner to solitary. Standard meal, beans, cornbread, water. But in the hallway, away from any cameras or witnesses, he made a choice. Deliberate contamination. He knew King would see it. That was the point. He carried the tray down the corridor, keys jangling, boots echoing on concrete. Opened the cell door. King sat on the bench, exhausted from 3 days of isolation. No sleep. Constant noise from other cells. The guard set the tray on the small table. didn't leave immediately. He wanted to see King's reaction. King reached for the fork, lifted it halfway to the beans, then stopped. He saw it clearly, saliva glistening on the surface, unmistakable. No question it was deliberate. King set the fork down slowly, carefully, as if the motion itself mattered. The guard stood in the doorway, waiting. King had options. He could refuse the food, call out the guard's behavior, demand to speak to a supervisor. He'd documented jail conditions before, written letters detailing mistreatment. But King did something else. He took the white handkerchief from his pocket, unfolded it carefully, and placed it on his lap, his father's ritual from childhood meals. He looked up at the guard and spoke 8 words. "I know you're better than this." No anger, no accusation, no threat. Simple, direct statement of belief. The guard froze. King continued, voice steady. "Your mother raised you better." King picked up the handkerchief, refolded it with deliberate care. "I'll wait for a clean meal." The guard's face changed. First, shock. This wasn't the reaction he'd expected. Then something else, something that looked like recognition or shame. He'd anticipated anger, perhaps refusal, maybe a report. He hadn't anticipated this. King sat quietly, handkerchief in hand, waiting. The guard left the cell, door clanging shut behind him. He stood in the hallway, tray still in his hands, beans with his spit still visible. King's words echoed. "I know you're better than this. Your mother raised you better." Memories flooded back, uninvited. His mother, Sarah, who cleaned houses in Birmingham's white neighborhoods during the Depression. She'd worked for black families too, never treated them differently, always with respect. He remembered her voice. "Everybody deserves dignity, baby." Don't matter what they look like. His mother never taught him this hate. She would be horrified by what he'd just done. The guard had grown up in the 1940s when Birmingham's racial hierarchy seemed natural, unquestionable. His father worked the steel mills, came home talking about keeping order, maintaining separation. The guard absorbed it all. The assumption that white and black had their places, that challenging the system was dangerous. But his mother's voice was different, quieter, but persistent. She died in 1959, cancer. He'd thought about her words at the funeral, how she treated everyone the same. He hadn't thought about them since, until now. Standing in that hallway, holding a contaminated meal tray, he realized this wasn't enforcement of order. This was cruelty. His mother would be ashamed. 20 minutes passed. The guard stood alone in the hallway, other guards wondering why he hadn't returned to the main desk. He made a decision, walked to the kitchen, got a fresh tray, beans, cornbread, water, untouched. Another guard asked, "What are you doing?" "Just fixing a mistake." He carried the clean meal back to King's cell, unlocked the door. King looked up from the bench, still holding the white handkerchief. The guard set down the fresh tray, wouldn't make eye contact. King's voice, quiet. "Thank you." The guard nodded once, quickly, and left. Locked the cell door, walked away fast. His hands were shaking. Other guards noticed the exchange. Word started spreading. Something happened with King. Some mocked the guard who'd returned with clean food. Getting soft on the troublemakers? Others were curious. What did King say? The guard refused to discuss it, but his behavior changed. He stopped participating in the small cruelties, the lost trays, the accidental delays. Other prisoners noticed. King started getting regular meals, delivered on time. King never mentioned the contaminated meal incident, never filed a complaint, never told his lawyers. He maintained the same dignity he'd shown that evening. The white handkerchief remained on the table during meals, folded, a quiet symbol. King spent his days in solitary writing. He had no paper initially, so he wrote on newspaper margins, toilet paper, anything available. His lawyers eventually smuggled in proper paper. He was drafting what would become Letter from Birmingham Jail, addressed to 8 white clergymen who'd criticized the demonstrations as unwise and untimely. The letter challenged white moderates who preferred order to justice. But King's actual strategy went deeper than political argument. He believed in appealing to individual conscience. Every person, no matter how trapped in hatred or fear, had some capacity for recognition, for change. The 8 words he'd spoken to the guard weren't calculated strategy. They were genuine belief. King had studied Gandhi, nonviolent resistance, the power of appealing to the oppressor's better nature. He'd seen it work in Montgomery when white bus drivers eventually treated black passengers with basic respect. He'd seen it fail in Albany when authorities simply arrested protesters without visible brutality, diffusing media attention. Birmingham was different. Bull Connor's violence was overt. Cameras were everywhere, and the nation was watching. But in that solitary cell, no cameras recorded what happened. Just one man reminding another of his humanity. King believed transformation happened person by person, conscience by conscience, not through mass conversion, but through individual recognition of shared humanity. The guard faced a crisis. He couldn't return to his old behavior. King's words had shattered something. But he also couldn't become an activist, join the movement, betray everything he'd known. He was trapped between who he'd been and who he might become. He continued working at the jail, but differently. When other guards made racist jokes, he stayed quiet instead of laughing. When they suggested losing a meal tray, he volunteered to deliver it instead. Small acts, barely noticeable, but departures from his previous pattern. Some guards followed his example. Maybe they were curious about what changed him. Maybe they'd had their own private moments of doubt. The jail's culture shifted slightly, not dramatically, but measurably. Protesters still faced harsh conditions, but some of the deliberate cruelty eased. King was released April 20th, 1963, after 8 days. Bail raised by Harry Belafonte and other supporters. The guard was on duty that day. He unlocked King's cell. King gathered his few belongings, including the white handkerchief, carefully refolded and placed in his jacket pocket. King nodded. Thanks. The guard nodded back. No words. King walked down the corridor, past cells of other protesters singing freedom songs. The guard watched him leave, knowing he'd never forget those 8 words. Birmingham erupted in May 1963. Bull Connor unleashed police dogs and fire hoses on young protesters, many of them children. Images shocked the nation. German shepherds attacking teenagers, water cannons knocking down women. President Kennedy sent federal mediators. Businesses began desegregating under pressure. King emerged as Birmingham's moral voice, but privately carried the weight of every arrested child, every injured protester. He never publicly mentioned the contaminated meal incident. That moment belonged to him and the guard alone. The guard continued working through the summer of 1963, watching Birmingham transform around him. Protests ended, some lunch counters desegregated, but tensions remained high. September 15th, 1963, a Sunday morning, the 16th Street Baptist Church, a few blocks from the jail, exploded. Ku Klux Klan members had planted dynamite. 4 young girls died: Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson, Denise McNair. The nation reeled. Birmingham's white community faced a reckoning. The guard heard the news at home, felt crushing guilt. His small change hadn't been enough. Delivering one clean meal didn't stop bombings. Treating prisoners with basic dignity didn't prevent murders. He'd thought his moment with King meant something, but 4 girls were dead. What good were 8 words against that kind of hate? King returned to Birmingham for the girls' funeral. The guards saw news coverage. King standing in the destroyed church, speaking of darkness and light, violence and hope. King's words at the funeral: "These children, unoffending, innocent, and beautiful, were the victims of one of the most vicious and tragic crimes ever perpetrated against humanity." The guard listened, remembering April in the jail cell. "I know you're better than this. Your mother raised you better." Had King been right? Was he better than his actions? Or was the church bombing proof that Birmingham's hate ran too deep for individual conscience to matter? The guard struggled with these questions through 1964 and 1965. He watched the Civil Rights Act pass, saw voting rights battles in Selma, observed Birmingham slowly, painfully change. But he couldn't continue working at the jail. Every cell reminded him of King, of the contaminated meal, of 8 words that had convicted him. He quit in late 1965, took a construction job. No dramatic redemption story, no public confession, no joining the movement. Just a quiet exit from a place where he'd learned something about himself he didn't like. He told his wife once, "I did something I'm ashamed of. A man reminded me I was better than that." Years passed. The guard worked construction, raised his children, tried to live according to his mother's values: dignity for everyone. Birmingham continued its slow transformation. Bull Connor was voted out. Schools began desegregating. The 16th Street Baptist Church was rebuilt, became a landmark. Martin Luther King Jr. expanded his work. Poverty campaigns, opposition to Vietnam War, organizing in Memphis. April 4th, 1968, King was assassinated on a motel balcony in Memphis, Tennessee, shot by James Earl Ray, a white supremacist. The guard heard the news at home, sat down heavily. His children asked what was wrong. He couldn't explain. How to tell them about a night in April 1963, a contaminated meal, 8 words that had changed him. He never told the story publicly. Too ashamed. Too complicated. How do you admit you once deliberately humiliated a man who would become a martyr? How do you explain that the same man's grace had shown you something about yourself you'd been avoiding? But he passed the lesson to his children. He taught them what his mother taught him. Everybody deserves dignity. He told them about working at the jail, seeing protesters, learning that courage wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes it was 8 words. The white handkerchief became legend. King had carried it through dozens of arrests: Montgomery, Birmingham, Selma, Chicago, Memphis. His father had given it to him in 1954, a simple gift with profound meaning. In jail cells across the South, King folded that handkerchief during meals, a ritual of self-respect. After King's assassination, the handkerchief was preserved, eventually placed in museums dedicated to the civil rights movement. Historians noted its significance, a symbol of dignity in undignified circumstances, of humanity maintained despite dehumanization. But they didn't know about the contaminated meal in Birmingham, about the guard, about 8 words. The guard kept a newspaper clipping of King's Birmingham mugshot from April 1963. On the back, in his own handwriting, he wrote, "I know you're better than this." He kept it in a drawer, never showed anyone. When he died in 1989, his children found the clipping while sorting his belongings. They recognized King's face, but didn't understand the handwritten words on the back. They kept it anyway, sensing it meant something to their father. The handkerchief folded, the words remembered, the transformation incomplete, but real. Subscribe, because what King taught that guard in an unwatched moment matters as much as any speech. The story eventually emerged through oral history. Other prisoners from Birmingham Jail remembered King's quiet dignity, guards who changed behavior. A historian interviewing former guards in the 1990s heard whispers about something that happened with King and a meal. The guard's name was never confirmed. He never came forward, but the 8 words survived. "I know you're better than this." Combined with witnesses who remembered a guard's behavior shifting, who noticed King never filed certain complaints, historians pieced together the incident. It became footnote in King biographies, a small story illustrating his philosophy of appealing to individual conscience. But the guard's experience, his mother's voice, his moment of recognition, his years of quiet guilt, remained unknown. King never wrote about the contaminated meal. In Letter from Birmingham Jail, he wrote about white moderates, about just and unjust laws, about tension necessary for growth. But the most personal moment, the 8 words spoken to a guard who just humiliated him, stayed private. Maybe King understood. Not every transformation needs witnesses. Some moments of grace work precisely because they're quiet, invisible, one human recognizing another. Birmingham today has monuments to the civil rights movement. The 16th Street Baptist Church is a National Historic Landmark. Kelly Ingram Park, where children faced police dogs, features sculptures of those events. Museums document the brutality and courage of 1963. Historians estimate over 3,000 people were arrested during the Birmingham campaign. Most of their names aren't recorded. Most guards' names aren't recorded either. But King's philosophy persisted. See the humanity in your opponent. Believe they're capable of change. Appeal to their better nature. "I know you're better than this" wasn't just words for one guard. It was King's entire approach to the civil rights movement. He believed white Americans, even those enforcing segregation, could recognize injustice. He believed conscience could be awakened. He was right about some, wrong about others. The church bombing proved hate runs deep, but the guard who brought back a clean meal proved transformation is possible, individual by individual, conscience by conscience. King's white handkerchief, folded on a metal table in a Birmingham jail cell, carried more weight than fabric. It carried his father's wisdom, his mother's values, and belief that even in the darkest moments, humanity could surface. The white handkerchief rests in a museum now, behind glass, carefully preserved. Visitors see a piece of fabric, read the placard about King carrying it through arrests. They don't know about the contaminated meal, about a guard's moment of shame, about 8 words spoken in an unwatched cell. The guard's newspaper clipping, found by his children, was eventually donated to a local historical society. They displayed it with other Birmingham civil rights artifacts. No one made the connection between the clipping and the handkerchief, between the guard and the moment. But the lesson remains. King believed people were better than their worst actions. He believed conscience could be reached. He practiced that belief in public speeches and private moments. 8 words in a jail cell mattered as much as "I have a dream" on the National Mall. Because transformation doesn't always happen on stages with cameras. Sometimes it happens in hallways, in moments of shame, in recognition of something better. The handkerchief stayed folded. The words stayed remembered. And the guard, unnamed in history, carried both until he died.